Dumelang Sambonani, hello South Africa. A very warm welcome to Expressions. This is definitely the place for you to air your views. I'm your host, Jacqueline Mapala.
And I'm your host, Umqolisiwa Masango. Now, we're not live to you today, but of course, we're still coming to you from our headquarters in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, where we're bringing you a special broadcast in Namhlanje. See Expressions as we're still keeping safe and keeping our distance, Jackie, our mask as well. Siyabuza kumbuzo balekele namhlanje. Is South Africa failing to uphold amalungelo wabantu abasha as well as children?
Yes, Mko, that's a very important question, and I hope by the end of the show we'll be able to answer that. As we know, as South Africans, on the 21st of March is the time where we commemorate Human Rights Day. Now, we know that the Bill of Rights, which is preserved in our Constitution, actually is the cornerstone of our democracy. Now, the Bill of Rights, Mko, is so important because it addresses some of South Africa's history of oppression, racism, and some of the human violations that we've experienced. But most importantly, it's also meant to protect the freedom, equality, and dignity of people. Now, what we want to find out from young people is simply this. As we reflect on this very important day, is there anything to celebrate when it comes to their human rights? Mgo?
Well, Jackie, I know we to producer way to Lindelo Goti, took the time to go to Alexandra to speak to a young person ngabe human rights issue as a young person. You did it right, and there were some awesome conversations that came out of it. Fascinating stuff. Have a look.
Now, I'm standing next to me, at least, is a gentleman by the name of Nelson. Now, we're going to ask him a simple question. What does his human rights actually mean? Does he feel, living in Alex, under these types of conditions, that those rights are actually respected?
We've been seeing this, 28 years old. Since from 95. I mean, like, 20-something years, this place like this. Ngabe being affected bengizoba senginamakhorela wonke lemisifo lezi beziloko zizingena kubiso sonke lesikhathi mangothutsha phe ikhorela is too much there even though ungayiboni but it's there. The virus is there even though ungayiboni. So siyazama ukugada ukuthi abantwana abancane bangadlaleli in that place. Just siyenza njengendlela ukuthi sidlula. Ayikho into esingayenza. Once sinokuthi sizame njenge-community sizoziklinela thina ngokuthi ngezithi izandla. But yes, you've been tired each and every time.
For a young person who is living here, do you feel Uguti, your basic rights when it comes to water and sanitation is respected and observed?
There's nothing I can do. I must leave. Mele ngiphushe. Ngaphandle ke-government shoot angeke ngize ngiphushe. We have to suffer siloko siyenzani, siloko siya phambili. Sihlala kuyo yona le nhlupheko le, siloko siya phambili. Ne generation le yethu ingane zethu lesi sizala, shoot nazo zizoza kuyo yona le generation le. If thina manje singathathi action njengoba nani nizile, ngiyabheka ukuthi abanye abangaphezulu they can do something. Noma ngaba yini, bona lokho okuncane sizoba sikutholile, we'll appreciate. Because even though nama toilet, we don't even have ama toilet are proper. We don't even have amanzi at all. We don't even have amanzi. So that nama toilet yabona uyithanja angama plastic. Bonisa ukuthi they don't care about us.
For me not. There's nothing gonna come up.
What does Human Rights Day mean to you as a young person going through these challenges around water and sanitation here in Alex?
14, the style like Alex, actually. Human rights, we're just celebrating njengelanga. There's nothing that's happening, to be honest. Kuba ilanga elibekiwe njengoba ulikhuluma. So for us, kuzoba a normal day, just a normal day. So I don't even count it because I exist ayenzakali. Yeah.
And do you feel, Oguti, you are living with dignity as a young person here in Alexandra under these conditions?
I don't live with dignity. Angijabulanga la ngikhona. Angijabulanga at all. And nami angifisa ukuthi ingane zami zizokhula kuyo lo community le zizobona lento le mina engiyibonayo. Dignity anginayo at all. Angijabuli to be here Alexandra, but angina choice. So mina ngiyenzene, mina ngiface lama consequences. Njengoba ngisho ngithi I'm glad ukuthi nibe khona nami la today ukuthi izobona ayikho at all dignity, but we don't have any choice. Mele siphile, mele survive njengabantu.
That was indeed a very heartbreaking insert, and I think just being on the ground and having to experience some of the challenges that Nelson was going through, it comes to show that the basic human rights of young people in this country are not necessarily observed. But we're going to continue with this important conversation. We're going to unpack it, and I have my lovely gentlemen who are going to be helping me with that particular discussion. I'm joined by Gershwell Brooks, who is representing the Human Rights Commission, and I am joined as well by Jamie Mighty, who is a regular here, who is a political analyst as well as an activist. Gentlemen, welcome to Expressions.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
We commemorate, we celebrate, we try to look to this day as something that's really, really special. But when you go on the ground and you really ask yourself, when we celebrate the 21st of March, Human Rights Day, we realize that maybe the rights of young people are not upheld. I mean, is this a true reflection?
Yes, I think when you look at it from a youth perspective, you can't help but make that conclusion. I think in the month of March, we've all been confronted with the ongoing crisis in the education sector, where the right to education is not fully realized, especially when you look at it from a tertiary perspective. And this begs the question, if we say to people and we commit that we are going to educate you as a young person, but then once you've done well and excelled, we're not going to honor the rest of that commitment. We're not going to follow the logical conclusion of that. And then we're going to say to you, your parents must pay. But when you provided me with fee-free education, you knew that my parents couldn't pay. And now you are saying to me, hey, well done for those distinctions. Go and do engineering at Wits, but uzobona phambili. And that, I think, is a manifestation of how the youth are experiencing the difference between the rhetoric around rights and their lived realities. We've seen problems with GBV, we've seen problems with poverty, with racism, where all of these rights against discrimination, rights for equality, are codified in our system, but they are not actualized in a meaningful way where young people can say, yes, indeed, my rights are being upheld in this country.
And it's so strange, and Gershwell, I want to bring you into this conversation. I mean, when we talk about Human Rights Day, it's not just a day, it's not just a date in the calendar. I mean, we're talking about Sharpeville massacre, essentially, where people went out into the streets and they were fighting for a future we're supposed to be enjoying today. I mean, where have we gone wrong that, I mean, in that even insert where Nelson, for instance, I mean, he's struggling with basic water and sanitation issues, let alone education. I mean, where did we get it wrong?
I think both of you have, quite frankly, touched on what the issues are. First and foremost, looking back at the history behind what we now celebrate as Human Rights Day, it marks probably one of the biggest, single greatest days during apartheid, which is clear testament of how human rights were violated at that particular point in time. And I think this should then give us an opportunity of saying that we're not going to go back there again. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be gunning down 60 people in Sharpeville. What it means is that we need to take that very foundation through the Bill of Rights that we have, through the Constitution that we have, and build on it. And the sad thing is that the Constitution provides us with exactly that foundation. Whether it be educational, whether it be water and sanitation, whether it be housing, whether it be healthcare, whether it be any of the other things that we talk about. The foundation exists, but it needs humanity, you, me, and everyone else, to build on that. So it's not up to the South African Human Rights Commission alone, with 180 staff members, to cater for 60 million people across the country. It doesn't just take the government, it doesn't just take civil society organizations, or business, or whoever else. It takes all of these organizations, all of these various structures of society, to pull together and then build on that very same foundation that has been established. And again, I firmly believe in this. It's the strongest possible foundation we can have, because our Constitution is hailed as by far the best in the world.
But I guess the question, and we're going to go quickly to an ad break, is, how do we turn the words and actualize them? How do we operationalize them? I mean, when we're talking about human dignity, freedom, we're talking about equality, how do we actualize that? And Mobekedi, maybe that is something that you can ponder on as we go to the break. We'll be back right after this. We're having this very important conversation. You're watching Expressions.
Is South Africa failing to uphold the rights of young people and children? That's the big question. Namhlanje Expressions. Now, we're not live, but you're still welcome to partake in this all important conversation. Ey'nkundleni zethu zokuxhumana sikhulumisana nabantu abasha, so they give you their accounts njengoba siphezu kwenyanga kaMarch. And of course, guys, once again, welcome to Expressions, and thank you so much for talking to us. We use the insert that Jacqueline did earlier on as, a springboard for this conversation that we're having right now. Is there much to celebrate for us young people at this point in time?
It's extremely unfortunate that we stand here today and we're celebrating Human Rights Day, but there's no celebration. We come here, and just before we came here, we were on the streets, not far, where there's currently more police than there are students. And today we're meant to be commemorating that there was Sharpeville, where there was so much police brutality. Yet we're staying here so many years later, and it's the exact same situation. How is this that you want to say that we want to breed activists, we want to breed the youth, young leaders? Yet we are constantly being pushed down. I stand here, I'm currently suspended by my own institution, Wits University, for merely just protesting peacefully. So what are we celebrating?
I personally do not think that we should be celebrating. The question that arises is, what are we celebrating? I have been in a place where I don't even feel safe walking around. We have all these rights. The Constitution, for instance, that doesn't even cater for us. The question that arises at the end is, whose mandate is it to fulfill what the Constitution brings forth? Something was said about people being the ones that cater for each other. For example, the right to equality is supposed to be something that is between citizens themselves when it comes to treating each other right. But there are rights like life, rights like safety that are government's mandate, and I still stand forth without those rights being protected. As a first-year student in UJ, I'm waiting for that knock for someone to tell me to move out necessarily because I can't afford fees. What am I going to celebrate? Am I supposed to celebrate the same education that I feel like I'm being deprived of?
As young people today, many young people have grown disillusioned by the idea of the Rainbow Nation. We are now 27 years in, and we can obviously see that there's a lot of problems. And COVID-19 has highlighted how many of our problems are intersecting and how many of our problems are coming together at the same time. And so I think as young people, I think that we have a generation of young people who are attempting and trying to grapple with the issues that this country faces. But I think that often there's a lack of political will to implement the policies that needs to be implemented to radically transform this country. I think that our political class, I think it's a problem that the people who formulated our constitution, who were there in the days of our constitution, that those people are still in power today, and that there's been a lack of transition of power from one generation to another. And I think that there's a coming generation that wants to take power, but there's a lack of political will to open the space for younger people to go into these areas and change our lives.
Okay, first and foremost, I want to highlight on police brutality. The protests are not new. We started this thing in 2015, 2016. We had a lot of demands, but none of those demands have been met till date, okay? So now, we have the so-called Constitution and nobody is above it. The Constitution is supposed to protect our rights. Section 17 specifically covers the right to protest peacefully. But as we posted, protest peacefully, we are met by police brutality, live ammunition, as she said, we are shot at, but we are protesting peacefully. So what exactly are we celebrating when we can't get free education?
My name is Dylan Mashele. Challenges that most persons with disabilities are facing, moreover in the work environment, it's reasonable accommodation and lack of DET. What do I mean by reasonable accommodation? I'm expected to perform to my level best without resources. For instance, if you're a blind person, you ought to have a screen reader, you ought to have a Zoom text keyboard. And DET, it's a manner where a certain company come and train the host employer on how they should reasonably accommodate you as a person with disability.
All right, thank you so much for that. And of course, Sibamba Lapo, we're going to continue with this all-important conversation uMasibuya from the break. And of course, Jackie, maybe if we can also hear from Ukashwal in terms of Uguti, Human Rights Commission, and how can ababukeli bethu access them emakaya there. It would be also good to that. So of course, we continue with this all-important conversation. When we come back, this is Expressions.
Welcome back. You're still watching Expressions in a Mon Youth Current Affairs show. And of course, as Expressions, we are advocating for the rights of young people in this country. And as you know, we're commemorating human rights in this country that is commemoratively celebrated on the 21st of March. And the poll question that we're asking you simply is this: is South Africa failing to uphold the rights of young people and children? Now, of course, we're going to wrap up this conversation, but I think we want to come up with some solutions. But I think, Jamie, maybe let me start with you. I mean, there were a lot of very poignant sort of comments that came from our audience, but I want to find out from you as a young person, are we seeing history repeating itself? Are we seeing the past being repeated, especially when it comes to police brutality?
I think on the question of police brutality, Andres Tatane was shot by the police 10 years ago, and now Mthokozi Sintumba has also been shot by the police coming out of the doctor's appointment that he was coming from and not even participating in the student protest. So while we may not be seeing the extremities of Sharpeville, I think what's painful and what is provocative to the democratic moment is that these moments are still repeating themselves in a dispensation where this should be a thing of the past. And that really does show that history may not be repeating, but it's remixing.
I mean, my comment would actually be one person dead is one person way too much. And I think from you, Gershel, I mean, we want to understand the work that you do as the Human Rights Commission. I mean, especially, and let's make it practical, you know, for someone like Nelson, who is dealing with challenges around, you know, water and sanitation issues, how would you practically assist someone like that?
So just as an example, recently the Commission actually had 2 hearings on water and sanitation, one in the Vaal area because of the pollution in the Vaal, in the Vaal catchment area, as well as in Hammanskraal here in Pretoria. And in both those instances, it was an issue of holding the municipalities responsible, because ultimately it's the municipalities' responsibility to deliver on clean, arable, drinkable and potable water for people, ultimately. And so that is exactly what needs to be done in this instance, is that the local government authorities need to be held to account to understand why it is the people are gaining access to that type of water. Why is it that that's the quality of water? But beyond that, also the general squalor that people are living in. When we talk about the right to housing, we're not saying that someone just has the opportunity to put up any type of shelter. They need to have housing or shelter that's befitting of human beings, and that is definitely not the case in this instance. So that is an example of the type of work that we do. It's a hearing, we make our directives, we make our findings. The directives and the findings that we've made, legally you're bound to follow those. If you do not agree with them, then you have to go to court and you have to ask for a revision. You have to review that. If the court agrees with you, yes, it will be reviewed. If the court doesn't, it still holds the power of the law. So ultimately, you need to deliver on those particular rights.
Yeah, and you know, my next question would be to you, because when we were speaking even to Nelson, what was very disheartening about that conversation is that he's completely lost trust in the ability of this constitution to protect him and uphold any of his rights. He feels that even, you know, the councillors will not listen to them. So they are voiceless, they're not seen, nobody really cares about them. So what are the consequences of people who do not uphold the rights of young people, especially in cases such as Nelson's situation?
I think we need to, and I don't want to give a difficult or evasive answer, but ultimately it depends on what the situation is. If we're talking about a municipality that holds that type of responsibility, of course, we can't bring criminal charges against someone in this particular instance, but there are instances where you can bring criminal charges against someone. I think we also need to understand that this becomes a cultural issue, going back to a point that you had raised around the issue of police brutality as an example. Ultimately, it is you need to respect human rights broadly. And what I mean by that is all segments or all segments of society ultimately need to respect it. So whether it be the police, whether it be local government, whether it be you and I, people need to respect people's rights. So someone has a right to clean drinking water. So I, as a municipal official or someone in local government, needs to make sure that that person gets clean water. As a police person, as a police official, ultimately, yes, I need to enforce the law, but does that entitle me to fire rubber bullets directly at protesting students? Does it entitle me to throw grenades at people? Or in some instances, as some of the young people have told us today, outnumber the students and still act with such a high level of brutality? Of course not. And it's not only in these instances, but we know that on a day-to-day basis, we're always reading stories of whether it was someone who was enjoying a beverage in their own garden, being killed by law enforcement, or whatever the situation may be. Ultimately, rights need to be respected by all.
And Gershel, let me come in. Literally 30 seconds. I mean, as we close the show, and I'm going to obviously throw it back to Mkolisi, I mean, how should we be commemorating and celebrating Human Rights Days as young people in South Africa? Jamie?
I think young people need to be on the streets protesting, fighting for their rights. You commemorate the fight by continuing the unfinished ones.
So I'm going to throw it back to you for some closing comments. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so very much for your insights.
Thank you so much for that, Jackie. And of course, you know, they've highlighted so many important issues. And of course, primarily we've seen it's been, you know, the fees protest that we've seen, rightfully so. But there's also other issues as well that we need to speak about, such as gender-based violence right now, which is what the young lady also brings in. Can you please just step forward and give us your parting shot, because there's something you also would like to highlight to us?
The name is Lutfia Dean, a student activist and a feminist comrade. For me, when I think of Human Rights Day, the most important thing I emphasize is that we cannot talk about commemorating it without the fight of women. And gender-based violence is the second pandemic we are facing. I myself, within the past week in protests, have faced brutality from not only police, but private bouncers that Wits University called upon. I've been groped, I've been grabbed, I've been hit. And as a woman, if this is what I'm facing to enter my campus and alleviate the struggles of other black women and black youth who come from rural areas and will be the first to graduate from these areas that they come from, the disadvantaged backgrounds. Where are we heading as a country? That's my question. That's my cry to the government. That's my cry to civil society. And we must ask ourselves, if sanitary pads are not provided across all tertiary institutes and high schools within South Africa, are we achieving the human rights? If sanitation post-COVID is 38 to 48% not provided, where do I go when I'm menstruating as a woman? And one thing I can say as a female activist, I'm not backing down. Free, decolonized education for every black girl child, every black youth citizen will be provided. And I say this in the spirit of Mthokozisi Ntumba. We will continue this fight. If we do not, and we do not succeed within our demands at Wits and other tertiary institutes, the fight is in null and void. And that death will not go unrecorded. History will absolve all of us. Thank you.
It's been a very informative show, eh?
Indeed, Mkoa. And of course, I don't even know whether there is a simple answer around whether we can get this right, but we definitely have to make sure that the rights of young people in this country are upheld. They are the future of this country. So, yeah, I think there's still a lot of work that we still need to do, hey, as a country.
Indeed, and thank you so much, Nawela Pekaya, for watching today's show, and thank you for your participation in Nkundla Zethu Zokuxhumana. Gershwell, Jamie, thank you so much for your time today on Expressions. Till next time, Nsale kahle.
Adios, muchachos. Bye.